Yeah, hey everybody. I'm Michelle Mai with College Planning Source. I'm here with Sean Ivester from Pivot Tutors, and we just wanted to share a little bit on the changes that are coming up with the ACT and also a comparison to the SAT since there's been so many changes in the last couple of years. So I will let Sean take over, and if anybody has any questions, please feel free to pop them into the Q&A.
All right, cool. Well, thanks for the introduction, Michelle. Hey, everyone. Again, my name's Sean. I'm the owner of Pivot Tutors. It's great to be here with you all this evening. I'm excited to talk through some of the upcoming changes to the ACT test. I know I've been getting a lot of questions from students and parents and other college advisors about what's happening here. Obviously, there are some big changes, and I think a lot of people are just trying to kind of get their heads wrapped around it. So hopefully this presentation helps and clears things up a little bit. So I will keep the presentation relatively short tonight, but I did want to touch on why the ACT is changing, what's changing, when it's changing, choosing between the SAT and the ACT, some quick prep tips, and then we can do some Q&A if you all have questions. But without further ado, why is the ACT changing? Well, what the ACT will tell you is that they're making the changes because they're trying to improve the testing experience for students. So, every year they get a ton of feedback from families, and the message that they're trying to push out with these changes are, hey, we heard your feedback, we analyzed it, and now we're acting on it. And really, there are three things that they're trying to address with the changes. The first is that they want to reduce test fatigue. So as you know, the ACT is a really long and fast-paced test, right? It's almost 3 hours in its current form. And I think by the end of the test, students' brains, or at least a lot of students' brains are kind of fried. And so what they're trying to do is just make it more of a manageable test and not have it feel like this big, overwhelming burden to take. The other thing they want to do is they want to give students more flexibility. So they want students to have more of a say in what they're being tested on. They don't want students to feel like they're being tested on this broad range of topics, many of which, might be irrelevant to their future career choices. They want them to have a little bit more control and optionality there. And then lastly, they are trying to enhance accessibility. So some of the changes that they're making might actually allow them to reduce the price of the test, which then financially would allow more students to take it. So that's what they're saying for why it's changing. But personally, I think the real reason is this. It's competition from the SAT. So if you go back not even 10 years, you can see that in 2017, the ACT was the dominant test choice for students, right? In 2017, the ACT had a 54% market share compared to the SAT, which had 46%. Fast forward to today, and the SAT has 58% market share, while the ACT only has 42%. And that number has been dropping every year. And so if you're the ACT, which is a private for-profit company, keep in mind, and you're looking at this data, you're probably saying, oh, shoot, we need to course correct here. We got to do something. So I think that's, really why they're doing it. Now, what exactly are they changing on the test? Well, there are 6 key changes to know about, and I've listed them here. I'm actually going to go through these one by one, so I won't say them all now, but to summarize, basically the ACT is becoming slower and shorter. Well, let's look at each of these on their own so that you have a better idea of what's actually happening. So first, they're reducing the length of the test. So the overall testing time is going to be reduced to 125 minutes from 195 minutes today, right? So basically, it's going from a 3-hour test to a 2-hour test. In order to support that shorter time, they're reducing the number of questions. So there will be 44 fewer questions on the new ACT. Most of those questions are getting taken from the English and math sections. So you can see that English is going from 75 questions down to 50 questions. Math is going from 60 to 45. Reading is dropping just 4 questions, and then the science will stay the same. In addition to there being fewer questions, students will also be getting more time per question. So currently on the ACT, students have about 49 seconds per question, and now they'll have 58 seconds per question. The amount of time per question actually varies depending on what section you're in. And I put those here, but at a high level, that's kind of the change. It's still less time compared to the SAT, which is closer to, I think, a minute 22 on average. So it's still going to be a little bit faster paced than that, but not as fast as it has been. There are also going to be fewer answer choices now, specifically just in the math section. So here on the left, you can see an example of an ACT math question. You can see there are 5 answer choices, A through E. In the future, there will only be 4 answer choices. So like the question on the right, answer choices A through D. And for those of you who are trying to do the math in your head right now, the answer is D. And then one of the biggest changes, and the one that I think students are probably the most excited about, is the fact that the science section will now be optional. Currently, it is required. It definitely tends to be, the dreaded section. I don't know if that's because it's at the end of the test and you're kind of already fatigued by then, or if it's the contents itself. It's actually not that sciencey. It's more like data analysis / logical reasoning. But a lot of students, I think, see science and they say, oh, I don't really like physics or chemistry or bio. I probably won't do well on this part. I'm just going to take the SAT. But now they can choose to take the ACT without the science. Of course, by making the science section optional, it does change how the composite score is calculated. So now the composite score is just going to consist of English, math, and reading. And currently, it's English, math, reading, and science. So with that going to be optional, it will just be English, math, and reading. Instead, students are going to get a section score for the science part in the same way that they do for the writing portion. And then if they do take the science part of the test, they'll get a STEM score as well, which includes math and science. The test itself is still going to be scored, 1 through 36. So nothing is changing, there.
Is that an average of each of the sections then? Is that right?
Yes, you get the score for each of the sections and then averaged.
Perfect.
In terms of when this is happening, it's actually already underway. So in October of last year, students had the ability to pilot this new format. And then for the April, June, and July tests this year, if you're deciding to take the test digitally, then you'll have the option to take the new format. And then in September of this year, regardless of whether you're taking the test digitally or on paper, you'll have to take the new format. So, the $1 million question is, how do you choose between the SAT and the ACT, especially with the tests becoming more similar than dissimilar? And so one way to do it is to just look at the style and structure of the test and then deduce which one you might prefer. So if, for example, if you know that you want to take a paper test, then you're kind of stuck taking the ACT because the SAT is fully digital now. But some other things to look at, if you're more advanced in math, you might consider the ACT because it does cover a broader range of topics compared to the SAT, which tends to be more algebra focused. I would say if you get easily distracted reading longer passages, you might prefer the SAT. The ACT has the longer passages with multiple questions per passage. So whereas the SAT is now changed to kind of a single paragraph, single question format. The ACT also tends to be more heavy on like the grammar and punctuation rules, whereas the SAT tends to look at things like expression of ideas or how the author is using or how to use evidence to support ideas, things like that. And I think it's kind of indicative of their questions in general. If you just prefer more straightforward questions, you might like the ACT. The SAT, I wouldn't say they're trying to trick you per se, but they do have more complex multi-step reasoning types of questions. So that's one way that you can decide which test to take. But personally, I think the better way, in my opinion, is just to take a practice test of each. In doing so, students can get a feel for which test they prefer. They can also see which tests they're naturally better at. And there's actually a conversion chart online that you can look up that's going to show you how SAT and ACT scores relate. So for example, if you got a 32 on your ACT practice test and a 1360 on your SAT practice test, you might choose the ACT because you're basically getting a free, 60 to 80 points there. And if you are a student and want to take a practice test, or you have a student who wants to, we do offer them for free every Sunday morning at our office in Sorrento Valley. And you can register on our website or just call or text or email us. We actually, as of this week, do have a full-length practice ACT test in the new format. So that is available if you wanted to try it out. Other big benefit of taking a practice test is that it's going to make your test prep more efficient. So coming out of the practice test, with us at least, you're going to get a very detailed score report that shows where your strengths and weaknesses are. So on the right, you can see an example of a score report for an ACT math section. Basically, it breaks down, where you're missing questions, the difficulty of the questions, and the specific types of questions that you're missing by topic. So what students should do is they can look at this and say, for example, I seem to be kind of weak in arithmetic problems, right? There were 11 questions. I got 5 right. I missed 6. That needs to be better if I want to get my score up. So then they can go away and they can do targeted practice on arithmetic problems and then come back, test again, and basically repeat the process. And students should be taking a practice test every 3 weeks or so until they're feeling pretty solid in the content. And that's also going to help a lot with the strategy side of things. I think it's really important that students know the test structure intimately. They should be very clear on how many questions there are in each section, how much time they have, etc. It's really important to get familiar with the pacing, especially on the ACT, and to know when to move on from a question because it's just burning too much time. I think running out of time it's like one of the worst mistakes that you can make, and it's easily preventable if you practice pacing and you have a pacing strategy. I would also recommend spending some time learning how to guess. As a reminder, there's no penalty for guessing, so no matter what, you should answer every question. But with strategic guessing, you should be able to eliminate 1 or 2 answer choices to give yourself a better guess. And then lastly, I would just remind everyone that students should register for 2 test dates. Across the country, students take the test on average 2 to 3 times. There's really no downside to taking it multiple times, so you might as well register for that backup test date. And that can also relieve a little bit of mental stress, just knowing, hey, this isn't my only shot. So yeah, anyway, that's it for the presentation. Like I said, kind of short and sweet. But if anyone has questions, I would be happy to answer them to at least to the best extent that I can.
I can't start my video, but that's okay. I just had a quick question. So just to be clear, like the ACT is not going to be curved like the SAT is curved. Is that correct?
That is correct. They do use a process that is similar to curves. I believe it's called scaling. The scoring is kind of complicated how they do it. Actually, we're part of the National Test Prep Association, and someone from the ACT came and presented to us last conference. And even they had a little bit of a difficult time explaining how it works. But there is a process by which they ensure that the different tests, are calibrated and, scores are accurately reflected across, the spectrum of the test takers nationwide.
Okay. And then so since the science section is optional now, I mean, have you heard anything about from the colleges if they're going to prefer that the students take it with the science section, kind of like when we went through this whole writing section debacle where, some schools wanted the writing section. I mean, is there any kind of feel for that right now? Because that's going to be the big question. It's optional. Do I take it or do I not?
Right.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I don't have a ton of perspective into that, unfortunately. I believe it will be, I'm just kind of guessing, like if you're going into a science major, you're going to want to take that to prove not only your interest, but your expertise in that.
Mhm.
Whereas if you're going into maybe more of a, something that's unrelated to that, it'll feel a bit more optional.
Okay. And when you said you offer a practice test, do you guys do that digitally or is there going to be any variation between the digital and the paper test?
So there will not be variation between the 2 tests, and students can decide to take either one. If you're doing like a school day test, I believe the schools will have the option to administer either. I don't know if they will actually give students an option or if they'll just kind of choose to pick one.
Mhm.
We will continue on our end to offer both digital practice tests and paper practice tests.
Okay, that's nice. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? I think that just, yeah, the biggest question that everybody had was what's the changes and how does it really compare to the SAT since they've made their changes? And I mean, you guys provide tutoring for both the SAT and the ACT or just the ACT?
We do tutoring for both.
Do you see between the two, now I'm just asking questions,
Yeah.
but between the two tests, do you see there to be a greater improvement in one test over the other as a majority or?
Yeah, so good question. Definitely students have an easier time increasing their score on the ACT compared to the SAT. So I think since
Why
the
that is?
SAT went digital, a lot of students immediately said, "Oh, it's only 2 hours. I like that." But the caveat with that, right, is there's fewer questions, so it's less forgiving as a
Right.
test. And so just kind of across the board, if you look it up, it's definitely kind of a known thing that it's easier to improve your score on the ACT. Now, I don't know after this new format comes along and it's going to be a shorter, more efficient test as well. I
Uh-huh.
imagine it will be similar to the SAT.
With the SAT, don't they like, because now it's digital, they can change the order of the sections? Is that true?
Yeah, so the way the SAT works is that it's section adaptive.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, depending on how you do on Math Module 1 will determine if you get the easier or harder Math Module 2.
Got it.
The ACT is not going to do that. It's just going to be a linear test. So it's not adaptive. Yeah.
And so, since you do both tests, you do tutoring for both tests. I know that a lot of times students will prep over the summer for the SAT because they're trying to prepare for that PSAT in their junior year as well, between sophomore to junior year. Do you see students that do a prep like a pretty intense prep for one, preparing for the other, that could help prepare for the other test too? Or are they just completely separate and different?
No, there is a lot of overlap in content for sure. So I don't think that if you were to prep for the SAT and then you at some point said, now I want to try the ACT, I think, that prep that you had done for the SAT would definitely help you.
Mhm.
But we would never recommend trying to prep for both tests at the same time. I feel like
Yeah.
they are different enough that it's really important to choose one, focus on that, and then, give it your all. And if at the end of that you decided now I want to switch to the ACT, then go do that.
Yeah. We've noticed that the like students that will prep for the SAT do an intense prep because they get used to like the timing of the tests and everything and they get comfortable with it. Makes it a little easier to switch tests if they wanted to. What other thing that I wanted to ask? Does anybody else have any questions? Feel free to ask. Looks like there is one. Will students always have the choice of paper versus digital, or is the paper version going away?
The paper version is not going away, and what they've said is that they want to continue to offer students the option to do both.
Okay. And then when would a student elect to take the science section? Would that be for a student who wants to study a STEM field, or would a student need to check every college to see if they want the science section or not?
A good question. Kind of going back to what I said earlier.
Right.
Yeah, it's like if you're going into a science major, you probably are going to want to do that, but it may be more college dependent. I'm not sure, Michelle, you might have a better view on this than me, actually.
Yeah, we're probably asking because we want to know if we have to call the colleges, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
No, we just didn't know if you had an insider scoop. And then the other thing I'd bring up is sometimes with integrated math 3, it goes up to basically algebra 2 trig. Do you suggest that a student, if they're going to prep for the either one of those tests, complete or almost be complete with an integrated math 3, course before they jump into the test? And
Yeah, I think it's helpful for
yeah.
sure. I mean, it's not that we work with students who haven't done that, and we'll teach those concepts in our test prep. But of course, it's a little easier if there's already some familiarity with them and it's more, refreshment or refreshing or yeah, just kind of brushing up on those skills.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, perfect. Well, I don't think we have any other questions, but thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.